It was the summer of 2013, and I was eager to make the most of the break before my senior year of college. My friends Jake, Tom, Mike, and I had planned a getaway at Jake's family cabin in the deep woods of Black Creek. The cabin was a hidden gem, isolated, serene, and nestled in a thicket of trees. The nearest town was over an hour away, which was perfect for a group of college kids looking to escape reality for a while. We spent our days hiking, swimming in the lake, and our nights around the campfire, telling stories and enjoying the simplicity of life away from our phones and responsibilities. It was on the last night of our 2-week stay when things took a strange turn. We were sitting around the fire, Jake playing his guitar softly, and Tom staring into the flames. I noticed Mike, who had been quieter than usual, kept glancing over his shoulder toward the woods. I figured he was just being paranoid, or maybe tired after the hike we'd taken earlier in the day, but something about his unease started to get to me too. "What's wrong, man?" I asked, nudging him lightly. "You've been acting weird all evening." Mike hesitated before answering, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever get the feeling you're being watched?" I rolled my eyes, assuming he was just setting us up for one of his infamous scary stories. He was always the one to turn a peaceful moment into something creepy. But this time, there was no mischievous grin, no punchline waiting to drop. He was serious. "You're just freaking yourself out," Jake said, not looking up from his guitar. "It's the woods. Every noise seems like something, but it's nothing." Tom stirred the fire with a stick. "Yeah, man. Relax. We're all alone out here." The conversation died down after that, but the tension remained. We soon retreated to the cabin for the night. Jake took the couch in the living room, Mike claimed one of the smaller bedrooms, and Tom and I shared the master bedroom. The silence in the cabin was thick, only interrupted by the occasional creak of the wood as it settled in the cool night air. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, but Mike's words stayed with me. That uneasy feeling followed me into the next day. The morning was uneventful, and we packed up to head back to the city. We threw our bags into Jake's beat-up SUV and set off down the winding dirt road that led through the forest. About 30 minutes into the drive, Tom, always the adventurous one, spotted something that made him shout out loud. "Whoa! Stop the car!" Jake slammed on the brakes, and the SUV skidded to a halt, kicking up a cloud of dust. Tom was already halfway out of the car before anyone could ask him what was wrong. I followed him, curious about what had caught his attention. He pointed to the side of the road, where an old, rusted Jeep sat partially hidden by overgrown vines and bushes. "Look at that!" Tom exclaimed, grinning like he'd just discovered a treasure. It was an old Jeep, probably abandoned for years. The paint was peeling, the tires were flat, and the windows were smashed. Jake and Mike got out of the car and joined us, equally intrigued. "Must have been here for years," Jake muttered, running his hand along the side of the vehicle. I wasn't as fascinated by the Jeep as the others. Something about the sight of it made me feel uneasy. I had the distinct sense that we were intruding, that this wasn't just some old junk car left behind in the woods. I wanted to leave, but before I could voice my concerns, Tom was already moving towards something else. "Guys, look at this," he called out, pointing further into the woods. Hidden behind a wall of thick trees was a cave, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Tom's eyes lit up with excitement, and I knew there was no stopping him. He loved this kind of thing, exploring abandoned places, chasing the thrill of the unknown. "Let's check it out," Tom said, already leading the way. "I don't know, man, it looks sketchy," I said, trying to discourage him, but it was no use. "Come on, where's your sense of adventure?" Tom teased, motioning for me to follow. Jake and Mike seemed hesitant too, but they shrugged and followed Tom's lead. I cursed under my breath and reluctantly joined them. The path to the cave was narrow, overgrown with weeds and thorny bushes that scratched at our legs. The deeper we went into the woods, the darker it became, the sunlight barely filtering through the dense canopy above. By the time we reached the mouth of the cave, the air felt cooler, and an eerie stillness settled over the forest. The cave itself was larger than I expected, its entrance framed by jagged rocks and thick vines. It was dark inside, the kind of darkness that swallowed everything whole. Tom pulled out his phone and switched on the flashlight, illuminating the interior of the cave as we stepped inside. The air was damp and heavy, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. I wrinkled my nose, glancing around. The floor was littered with animal bones, skulls, rib cages, and other remains that looked like they'd been there for decades. But that wasn't the worst part. As we ventured deeper into the cave, we found something far more unsettling. At the center of the cave was a circle of stones, and inside the circle were various objects, old, tarnished jewelry, coins, and other trinkets. But what really caught our attention was the human skeleton lying just beyond the circle. It was wearing what looked like a necklace and several rings, all gleaming in the dim light. "Holy shit," Tom whispered. "Look at this." "Let's get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. "This is messed up." But Tom, as usual, didn't listen. He stepped forward and crouched beside the skeleton, reaching for the necklace around its neck. I felt a surge of panic, a gut feeling that something terrible was about to happen. "Don't touch it," I warned. But it was too late. Tom pulled the necklace free and held it up, admiring it in the light of his phone. "Relax, it's just some old junk," he said, smiling. "Look, there's more." Jake and Mike followed suit, each grabbing something from the circle. Rings, bracelets, anything that looked valuable. I stood frozen, my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a huge mistake. Suddenly, my eyes were drawn to something scrawled on the cave wall, written in what looked like dried blood. "Whoever takes from this place will suffer the wrath of Isabella." "Guys, look at this," I said, my voice shaking. Jake glanced at the writing and scoffed. "It's just some local legend to scare people off, don't worry about it." But I couldn't ignore the knot of fear tightening in my stomach. We were meddling with something we didn't understand, something dangerous. We left the cave shortly after, each of us carrying the objects we had taken. I hadn't touched anything, but the others were already talking about selling the jewelry, joking about the warning on the wall. We returned to the cabin that night, and for a while, everything seemed normal. But that night, something happened that none of us could explain. Jake was the first to experience it. It was around midnight when he woke up to a strange sound. Soft, whispering voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. At first, he thought he was dreaming, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. He glanced at the clock, 12:30 a.m., and groggily got out of bed, wondering if one of us was playing a prank. He opened the front door, expecting to find Tom or Mike messing around, but instead, he found someone else entirely. Standing on the porch was a woman. She was beautiful, with long, dark hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the moonlight. She was wearing a blue dress that shimmered as she moved, and her eyes were locked onto the bracelet Jake had taken from the cave. Who are you?" Jake stammered. The woman smiled, but there was something unsettling about it, something cold and dangerous. "Is this how you greet your guests?" she asked softly, her voice like silk. Jake took a step back, his heart racing. "What do you want?" Her smile faded, and her eyes darkened. "What is mine?" Before Jake could react, the woman lunged at him, her fingers wrapping around his wrist. Her touch was like fire, burning through his skin. He screamed in pain, but she didn't let go. Instead, she tightened her grip, and Jake watched in horror as his skin began to rot, the infection spreading up his arm. "You took what was mine," she hissed. "Now you'll pay." Jake's screams echoed through the cabin, waking the rest of us. We rushed into the living room to find him lying on the floor, writhing in agony, his arms swollen and blackened by the infection. The woman was gone, but the damage had been done. By morning, Jake was dead. We were all in shock, unable to comprehend what had happened. The doctors said it was some kind of infection, something fast-acting and deadly, but they couldn't explain how it had spread so quickly. We knew the truth, though. We had seen the woman, the ghost, the wrath of Isabella. That night, Tom was next. He had been driving back from town when he saw her again. She was sitting in the back seat of his car, her dark eyes watching him through the rearview mirror. He slammed on the brakes, but when he turned around, she was gone. He tried to convince himself that he was imagining things, but then he felt it, the same burning sensation that had killed Jake. The infection had started on his hand, where he had worn one of the rings from the cave. Terrified, Tom called me in the middle of the night, his voice shaking with fear. "Sarah, it's happening to me. We need to go back to the cave. We have to return everything." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the necklace and rushed to Tom's house with Mike. When we arrived, Tom's hand was already blackened, the infection spreading just like it had with Jake. There was no time to waste. We piled into the car and sped toward the cave, the weight of the cursed objects heavy in our pockets. The drive through the forest was tense, the silence broken only by Tom's labored breathing. I could feel the presence of something watching us, something waiting for its revenge. When we reached the cave, the air was thick with dread. The entrance loomed before us, dark and foreboding. We stepped inside, the chill of the cave wrapping around us like a shroud. Suddenly, Isabella appeared. Her once beautiful face was twisted into a mask of rage, her eyes glowing with fury. She pointed at us, her voice echoing through the cave. "You took what was mine." Tom, shaking with fear, threw the ring at her feet. "I'm sorry. Please, just take it back." But Isabella wasn't satisfied. She wanted more. Desperate, Tom grabbed a knife from the ground and, with a scream, cut off his infected hand. The bracelet fell from his wrist, and Isabella vanished into the shadows, her laughter echoing in the darkness. Tom collapsed, blood pouring from his wound, but the infection had stopped. He had survived. We left the cave in silence, the weight of what we had done hanging heavy in the air. The cursed objects had returned to the skeleton, their rightful place. But the warning remained. Whoever takes from this place will suffer the wrath of Isabella.